So Nathan, you ready to talk about Leatherface?
Oh, the prequel that came out a couple of years ago. Yeah, why not?
No. I mean Leatherface. You know, the third Texas Chainsaw Massacre film.
Oh, is this one of those they did a name that's the same as something else thing again?
Do you just want to talk trash about trash?
Yeah, let's talk trash about trash.
So, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre by Tobe Hooper, classic or not?
Classic, big time.
Oh, yeah, I think it's one of my favourite films, not just horror, but in general. And I'm also a big fan of the sequel, which a lot of people hate. I know you like the sequel as well.
Yeah, I'm in that camp where I'm like, I actually think the sequel's more entertaining than the first one, but for schlock reasons.
But look, I've never been a huge fan of 3. I saw it once a long time ago on VHS, and I remember it being okay. At the time, I was thinking, well, I know this is a Texas Chainsaw movie, but it feels more like a Nightmare on Elm Street movie in tone.
Yeah, it's very clean, the way it looks. Even the house, they put bones in it, but it doesn't look dirty.
Yeah, it's filth that doesn't look dirty, which I know is weird to say, but the original film had this grungy quality to it that this one lacks. And that kind of sums up a lot about Leatherface, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre III. It's trying to capture the vibe and aesthetic of the original, but it just feels like a hollow recreation. And we'll explain why that is a little later on. But until then, let's talk about plot. I mean, it won't take long.
Fuck you, mister.
It starts with the opening crawl, which retcons the second one. It just talks about the first movie.
Which annoyed me straight away that they just cut the second one out. But that's a trend for this series. I think we've had 3 direct sequels to number 1 now, I think.
Yeah, and 2 prequels.
Yeah, but they're different prequels.
And one of them was to one of those sequels.
Yeah, look,
I think.
I don't know. It's hard to keep track.
What the hell's going on? What's going on?
But our film focuses on a young couple who are undertaking a very important task.
To take a car from California to Florida, the car's not that fancy. I don't get the whole idea of the trip. They hit an armadillo because Texas.
Don't you dare take the name of Texas in vain!
The most depressing thing to me is that the scariest part of this entire movie is when they hit the armadillo.
Middle of nowhere.
Because it's like a jump scare and it made me spill my coffee on myself. And it's the most...
Yeah, that's like the first jump scare that puts you on edge. You're like, oh, jeez. And then nothing like that happens
There's
again.
not even anything remotely scary in the rest of the film. But after they hit that armadillo, they go to a service station to check their car and fuel up. And there they meet a weirdo called Alfredo, who is definitely not a sex pervert. They didn't even try and be subtle with the weird sexual undertones, because there's a bit where he's literally got the peg of the nozzle in the back of the car and he's just thrusting.
Yeah, and he's just looking at her in the rearview mirror.
Make you moan. Make you moan real good. You don't like it? Mm-hmm. You like me, don't you?
You know something? You disgust me.
But luckily our couple are saved by a Texas gentleman named Tex, who's played by Viggo Mortensen, who I'm sure doesn't regret doing this role.
Yeah, old Aragorn himself comes to the rescue.
Oh, I like Texas.
And he essentially saves them from this pervert who goes berserk and actually pulls out a shotgun and starts shooting at them. And it looks even briefly like Tex dies trying to save these people.
Yeah, and he says he's a hitchhiker. And they just leave him there and drive off and he gets shot. And you're like, okay.
Yeah, it's like, oh, our protagonists. Great.
Oh, that doesn't sound very heroic.
But of course, in true horror film fashion, Tex did give the couple a little bit of advice before they left and told them to go through a back road. But what is Tex really?
He's part of the family, Chainsaw family.
Yep, he's the brother of Leatherface, and he's one of the main bad guys alongside Alfredo, another brother called Tinker, an older woman called Mama, and an unnamed little girl who's got a bit of a mean streak.
This is Sally.
But yeah, those wrong directions take our duo to chainsaw country.
There they nearly run into the third and really only other character in this film, Ken Foree, Benny.
Yeah, and he's a survivalist who's been living with a group of survivalists in the mountains who just happen to be at this place at this time. And yeah, he's our other main character, and he's honestly the best character in the whole movie.
There's a bunch of guys and they have guns too.
Yeah, I know. And chainsaws. Militant lumberjacks. I see them all the time.
And it's good, though, that he's actually armed with a machine gun, because maybe that's the only thing that can take on a silent chainsaw, because apparently Leatherface can just sneak up on people with a running chainsaw.
It's done.
It's gonna have to do. Let's hit it.
Surprise, motherfucker.
Well, that's one of the things that was a problem with this film for me, was the chainsaw doesn't sound right to me. It sounds like an electric chainsaw, which would make sense. He just flicks a switch and it starts.
I love the idea that it's an electric chainsaw, because it means Leatherface would be running around with this massive extension cable, which is just so not practical.
Oh, look at me! I'm Leatherface!
But yeah, from there, it's essentially a remake of our original film. There's a cannibal family who starts to torture and attack our characters, but it just feels so thin, like they're stretching every plot point out so that they can reach, the 80-minute mark and actually call this a feature film.
Well, it doesn't help there's only 2 people.
Yeah, beyond our main character, there's only 2 people who might die, so much of the time is spent on them, and it just feels like the filmmakers are spinning their wheels. Although they do have a pretty elaborate kill on the main dude.
And then they got like that weird mallet rig thing. They just let go and smash his head. You're like, okay.
Like a giant version of the board game Mousetrap.
Watch your step, or you could get trapped yourself. Complete your cheese wheel and win with the Mousetrap game. Adult assembly required.
Look, it's pretty admirable they try and add to the mythology of the world a bit, albeit pretty superficially. Like, they have a scene where Leatherface loses his chainsaw, and he pulls his version of a dagger, which is a tiny little spinning saw, which is just about the dumbest thing I've ever seen. And of course, Leatherface gets himself a new, shiny chainsaw as a gift.
But then it says on it, the saw is family. And I'm like, okay, this is where you've missed the point of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie.
Yeah, for sure. That phrase, saw is family, is ironically made famous by a scene in Texas Chainsaw 2, which was ignored by this film.
You got one choice, boy. Sex or the saw. Sex is, well, nobody knows. But the saw is family.
It's family.
Wait till Granddad hears about this.
But in the context of that movie, the phrase is about his literal family, like killing alongside your family is tradition. Whereas in this film, it feels like they literally think the saw itself is important rather than what it represents. It's like they just looked at the title and went, chainsaw, that must be the most important part. And honestly, a lot of this shallowness can be linked to a lot of background shenanigans that went on during production. Should we get into it?
Just move along and keep moving. Don't stop for nothing or nobody.
Okay.
So, New Line Cinema, the company behind this film, bought the rights to the Texas Chainsaw series in the hope they could make it a new ongoing franchise like their Nightmare on Elm Street films.
Tell him Freddy sent you.
And they wanted to have Leatherface as a new horror icon, which explains why they make him this kind of huge lumbering shadow over the whole family. He's not in charge per se, but he pretty much can do what he wants.
Where in the original ones that he was just another member of the family.
Yeah, the original film was very much about the family as a whole. Leatherface was just the most outwardly recognizable due to his unique look. And now they've put him at the forefront. It's right there in the title.
Yeah, it's Leatherface. And then you're like, oh, okay. And then they make him like this big main thing with the dude with the chainsaw. And you're like, that was just one part of this whole disturbing movie.
Oh, totally. And you think that'd be clear when people see the poster for Tobe Hooper's follow-up to the original. Like, I know it's designed to poke fun at the Breakfast Club poster, but it still focuses on the family, not Leatherface alone. In many ways, this film is the seed that would eventually grow into the more recent Texas Chainsaw films, which focus on Leatherface almost exclusively. Don't get me wrong, he's a fantastic character, but he's not the be-all and end-all when it comes to Texas Chainsaw.
It's okay now. It's okay.
By focusing on this one character, and to be blunt, just on the gore and kills, they've kind of lost the original heart of the first film. Like, I know I'm biased because I love it, but the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre wasn't just a straight up horror. In many ways, it was trying to make some pretty big statements about the world at the time. Like Hooper has explicitly said, much of the film was inspired by real-world violence and cover-ups of war crimes in Vietnam, and quite a few critics have noted in many ways the film is about the death of the American dream and the hope once found in the hippie counterculture movement, which is perhaps why the film feels like a really bad acid trip. And there's a lot more perspectives as well when it comes to critics and their views on the film, but long story short, the original had a lot to say.
Yeah, but a lot of people go, have you seen that movie where the guy in the wheelchair gets hit with a chainsaw?
and to be fair, a guy in a wheelchair does get hit with a chainsaw in the first film, but I guess that's the pleasure of Hooper's movie. It has these big ideas, but also the scares. But they kind of lost the big ideas with part 3. They just focused on the kills.
You made a movie called, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Leatherface Texas Chainsaw Massacre III. You better offend, I hope it offends people, They
actually focused so much on the kills, it feels like the other more nuanced elements of the series took a back seat. And it was probably a bad decision overall, because the ratings board at the time was cracking down on violent films, and a lot of the kills had to be trimmed to avoid an X rating, because an X-rated film couldn't be shown in a lot of mainstream cinema chains, and because this was meant to be a franchise film, they needed to reach as many people as possible. But yeah, that's why so many of the kills just cut away awkwardly, which is super frustrating when that's really all there is to offer here.
It's like, why'd you cut away there?
Interestingly, Hooper faced similar pushback on Texas Chainsaw 2, but they ended up releasing the film unrated so as not to cut out any content. But I suppose that's because he had something he wanted to say and didn't just have a product to sell.
Yeah, exactly. That's where it shows someone who's made something with passion and they actually care about what they've created, and it's what they want, the story they want to tell and how they want to tell it, rather than a movie made by committee.
Which this is. They even changed events due to screen testing. So Ken Foree's character actually died in the original version, but test audiences hated that so much they brought him back despite obviously being dead.
Yeah, and it's like, didn't he fall on a chainsaw in a pond and drown? And then he just pops up and he's like, hey! And then he gets smashed with the mallet and he's like, I'm still good. Like, holy crap.
I'm coming to rescue the lot of you. Ow! Ugh, I'm bad at this.
Yeah, oh, look, this film, I actually enjoyed this movie.
Yeah, so did I. I mean, it's not a good Texas Chainsaw film if you're considering the first two, but it's a fine enough 80s schlocky horror. And it's pretty much a masterpiece in comparison to the follow-up, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Next Generation, despite that film starring 2 Academy Award winners, Renee Zellweger and Matthew McConaughey.
Oh man, I actually forgot that. Like, I've got all the Texas Chainsaw movies and I forgot about that one completely.
Probably for good reason, mate.